This is episode 9 with Chef Sebastian Heil. iTunes review of the week comes from Charles Murray. He says, "Great resource for entrepreneurs and progressive thinkers. I listen to a lot of podcasts and Thriving Life Club looks like it may become one of my top favorites. Really good interviews that give good insights, interesting variety of topics. Thank you, Charles. Submit a quick review on iTunes and your review might get featured next week." Hi, my name is Leon Gabrielian, and this is the Thriving Life Club, the podcast for those who want to thrive in every area of life. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the club. Let's begin. Welcome back to the club, champion. Today, our amazing guest is Chef Sebastian Heil. He is currently the executive chef of the City Club Los Angeles, a private business club in the heart of downtown LA. I met Sebastian's exceptional culinary creations before I actually met him. Aside from being a culinary genius, Sebastian is a very kind, down-to-earth kind of man who genuinely cares about people, both inside and outside the kitchen. He's someone about whom you would immediately, at the very first time meeting, say, he's a great guy. There's a lot of wisdom in his words, and you will find that what he has learned from his experience as a chef is very relevant and applicable in real life. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. Let's jump right in. Welcome to the Thriving Life Club, Sebastian.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on this podcast, and I appreciate the kind words. It's definitely an honor to be here.
So who is Sebastian Heil, in your own words?
Well, who am I? I am, by definition and by trade, I am a chef. I'm the executive chef at the City Club Los Angeles. I've worked my way up throughout my career in the culinary arts field. And what I love about this career, it's one that rewards determination and the amount of time you put in. I started off, I remember that, as a banquet prep cook, so that meant a lot of chopping herbs and cutting mushrooms. And I was working at that time at a very, very big banquet establishment, very high end. But when you clean mushrooms, you clean 15 cases. When you chopped herbs, you chopped 15 pounds, which might not sound like a lot, but if you look at 15 pounds of parsley or rosemary, you'll see very quickly that's a huge amount. So I believe I'm a person that was created by this field. You know, my determination, my drive definitely matched up very, very well with this field, this work, and this constant drive that I had of wanting to be better and getting better at the things that I did. You know, I think this field leaves you as somebody that is always learning, a student of the game at all times, and I'm very proud to be that.
How long have you been in the culinary arts?
Started about 12 years ago. When I came to the States, I started culinary school here. I went to the Arts Institute of Phoenix in Phoenix, Arizona. You know, it was a great program that at that time was led by a German master chef and a Chinese master chef. They kind of co-hosted that program, and really great people, just enormously talented. Probably have forgotten more about cooking than I would ever learn. Just really old school, very, very well and detail-oriented and well brought up in this industry. And I finished my associate's degree at that culinary school and was lucky enough in this field to be traveling around. I feel that, especially in the beginning, when you kind of hone your skills and you more or less are finding your place in this industry, you know, changing things up is important. That doesn't mean that every 2 or 3 months go somewhere else, but I was lucky enough that about every year, at least in the beginning, I was able to hop around a little bit, and not just to a different hotel or a different club or different restaurant, but different regions of this country. So I started out, obviously, as I said, in Phoenix, Arizona, and then managed my way to South Carolina, Florida, back to South Carolina, Florida again, but just on opposite coasts. And then found my way out to California. And I think that it was really good in this industry to kind of gain the depth of just even how regional cuisines work, how different all these influences can be. and how determined you have to be to kind of keep soaking them up, you know.
You told me who Sebastian is as a chef. Tell me who you are as a person, your story, and what made you choose the culinary arts.
To give you a little background on the culinary arts, I think culinary arts, cooking in general, I always like to affectionately call it somewhat this boulevard of broken dreams, because you very rarely find people whose first job was cooking. I say that affectionately though, because to me, I adore this field, and I love it for everything that it is. And I knew I fell in love with it. And back in Germany, where I grew up, we didn't have a Food Network channel. You know, I'm talking probably late 80s, early 90s. And I remember seeing one thing there had two chefs that were on TV. And I remember one of them had a show, and he was doing the coolest thing that I'd ever seen, which was supreming an orange. Now, this might not seem like a lot, but again, we didn't have a whole lot of cooking shows. You know, we only really had two, maybe three, and they would only run about once a week. So it was really interesting to see this guy doing that. His name was Johann Lafer, and he was supreming this orange. And, it was just such an interesting thing that took me just completely and just fascinated me. And I said, at that time, I want to be able to do that. But funny enough, it just, my path didn't lead to it. I finished school in Germany and then went to the mandatory army service and started actually working as a governmental worker in Germany. Funny enough, very, very different from what life was now. But then when I moved to the States, I kind of decided that this would be a good time to follow the dream. You already move out here. You're making this more or less big cut and change in your life. So I figured that what better thing than starting your own, starting your dream and following your passion. And that's when I signed up for culinary school here. And really, that moment from back then will always stand out. And it was just such a terrific thing. And I remember just funny moments in this field where I remember in 1999, I came as an exchange student to the United States, and the Food Network channel was, I believe, running at that time. And I just remember just being in awe that there was an entire channel that solely evolved around food and cooking. I thought that was the most fascinating thing.
Tell me a little bit about the journey to where you are now. Was it all smooth and easy?
I would never call this journey, and I would never call this field, and I would always be honest to my kids, or honestly any kid that would ask me about that. This is not a journey you take when it's smooth and easy. I will be very honest, though, that I believe in life, you have these moments where you're given two opportunities of what you can do. You can choose one route or the other route. And I was always very fortunate enough to have people in my life, especially in my professional career, that, were there at those times and showed me a way. And it was not the easier way, but it was the way I took. I remember I ran into a German chef, even maybe going back a little more. I was in culinary school, and I was getting ready to get my first culinary job. And I remember that I was offered a job at a casino. And I went back to the culinary program and talked to the German chef and told him, oh, my God, I was offered this job at a casino, and they're going to pay me this much. And he just looked at me and said, you're not going to take that job. And I was just looking at him, why? It's like, Sebastian, listen to me. This is going to be your first job in a career that you've chosen. This is going to be the single most important job you'll ever take. It will put a stamp on who you are as a chef, and it will make sure that it puts you on a path that you can follow. And I'm telling you, you should not go and take this job. I think you should go to these career fairs, and you should, try your luck there and see if you can get a job there. So he mentioned two hotels in the Phoenix area that are still to this day very, very great. One is the Phoenician, and one was the Arizona Biltmore Resort and Spa. Now, to kind of make the story a little shorter, the Phoenician interview didn't go very well. I was very disappointed leaving that, and just thought to myself, you know what, I'll give the Biltmore a shot. So they had a career fair, and I went to that career fair, And I remember seeing a chef walking in while I was sitting there waiting to be interviewed, because we were talking a gigantic ballroom that was, split up into food and beverage, human resources, service, and just everything. We had golf course, so all that stuff was all part of that. Housekeeping. And I remember waiting, and the chef walks in, grabs one of the food and beverage resumes, and just happens to be mine. So we start interviewing, and about a minute and a half into the interview, comes out that he's actually German. So we start speaking German. And I remember to this day, he was, trying to make light of things and trying to, keep it funny and easy. And I just remember I was so nervous because I wanted that job. I saw the hotel. It was really just such a nice hotel and so high end and a landmark in the area. And he, at one point, just looked at me and was like, "Stop sweating. You already got the job." And I remember I was sitting there, I'm like, I'm trying. And I was literally just pouring sweat from my forehead and just very, very crazy. But I ended up getting hired there, and I was getting hired in the banquet department with him. He ended up, it turned out to be that he was the executive banquet chef. And I remember he always kept me very close to him and made sure that, I had 2 days every week where I'd have school all day. Those were obviously the 2 days where I could not go work in the hotel. So he always made sure that for those 3 months that was the case. Those 2 days would always be my off days, but I would work on all the other days. So obviously the weekend the school was closed. That's when I would go and, work whatever shift I had to work at the hotel. When I had to go to school in the morning, I would go work in the afternoon, and so on and so forth, which made for very, very long days, because imagine that, I probably would get up between 5:30 and 6 a.m., get ready, drive out to school so that I had to live a little bit outside of the city, so, where it was a little bit more affordable to live there. And I would drive there just to make sure I make it on time for class at probably 8 a.m. Then you would go to school till about 2 o'clock, and then that would be a day where I would do school and work. And then I would drive so that my shift would start at 2:30, so that I would make it in time to my shift at 2:30. Then you'd work till, let's say, 11:30, sometimes longer, depending on what the work was. So sometimes it would be that you'd get home at 1 in the morning, and then you'd still have to do homework. You would still have to do, do the reading you were assigned to do, the report you had to do the studying for tests you had to do. So, there were many, many nights where 3.5, 4 hours was the max you would get. And that was a lot. 4 hours would be a lot. So, but I was very lucky to meet this chef who ended up being my mentor for the first 3 years. And, we moved together from Phoenix to South Carolina. And then from South Carolina, we went to Florida. And when he ended up leaving Florida, going to Hawaii, I ended up staying there. And that was really that first hotel, was called South Seas Island Resort. Very, very nice hotel. Was an island resort where the last 2 miles of the island belonged to the hotel. Just tremendous. It was about a 45-minute ride, because obviously living on the island was not affordable with the salary that I was making. I had to live on the mainland, which meant that it was about a 45-minute ride every day to work. And it was a lot of hours. That hotel was probably, I call it culinary boot camp, because I started getting hired as a sous chef and left there as the executive sous of the property, and all that within 4 years. Let me assure you that none of those things none of those titles, none of those promotions were handed to me as a gift. They all were earned, and they all had to be earned. So we're talking many, many 100-hour weeks and many, many months with maybe 1 day off, 2 days off. But that's the field, and that is just how it is. I'm not saying this because, I want props or I want to get pat on the back for it. I'm saying that because I want to make sure that people understand that this is an industry where you earn things, and that was done that way. But going back to your original question, no, the path was not easy. It is a path that means many hours of work. That means you work when others are off. That means you work on Valentine's Day. You are the reason people can take their date out for dinner. That means on Thanksgiving, you are the reason why people can go and go to a buffet or a brunch. Same with Christmas, same with New Year's, same with all these days. If you work in a hotel, hotels are 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. There's no closures. There's nothing. It is always on, and that is just the nature of it. In the beginning of my time, most of my career I spent in hotels, so it was very much a a progression. But like I said, the path wasn't necessarily easy. It's in hindsight, I'm proud of it. I'm so happy. But if you'd ask me again to go back to work 100 plus hour weeks and three hours a night, no, because you want to have some kind of private life. You want to be able to maintain a relationship with a person that you love. And it takes special people in your life that understand that your career is demanding in that way. And sometimes you find them early. Sometimes, like me, you find them later, like I do now.
Sebastian, let me ask you this. What is the biggest challenge you had?
The biggest challenge I've had, biggest challenge with a job that asks you to be on, meaning on, like just, you're focused on it, thinking about it, is finding clear separation between work and private life. Trying to find the balance in your life. This job does not allow for a whole lot of that, which makes it even more so important that you stamp out that time for yourself. I've been sometimes more, sometimes less successful at it. It is a very challenging part of this job. I think that you need to, adapt yourself no matter where you are, at what job you work in, and find these moments where you kind of recharge your batteries, decompress, and get the energy for the next challenge in your career. In all honesty, I feel like that is the most challenging part of it. The hours worked, I know they sound a lot, but you get used to them. You kind of develop a routine with them. But the problem with that routine is that it's a routine that is geared towards work. So it's very easy, like I said, in those moments to forget the balance, to make sure you take care of yourself, you get appropriate sleep, rest, and people might think I'm kidding about it, but if you're in your early mid-20s versus your mid-30s, that already shows you how quickly you can recover from things and so on and so forth, and that does not get any better over time. So that is probably in this industry the most challenging part. It's a very physically demanding job and a mentally demanding job because you constantly are worried about so many different things in your day. Sometimes it's tough to get away from it over the weekend, or on your days off. So that's probably the biggest challenge that I've discovered in my career.
What advice would you give to those who also have physically and emotionally draining jobs based on your experience thus far?
I love that you said emotionally challenging because I think every job where you pour your heart and soul into it also strains you emotionally because you like I said, pour all of yourself into that job. I think that my best advice is to find things you're passionate about outside of work. I think that is something that is very, very big and that you hold on to those because it's easy to say, let's say you're passionate about hiking. Let's say you're passionate about model cars. Whatever it is that you find outside of your job and outside of your routine because, you're going to spend most of your week involved in your job. So it's very easy to say like, okay, this weekend, I'm just going to work a little more. I'm not going to do that. Or I'm not going to, go on that hike that I had planned. I think sticking to your guns with that is find the things you're passionate about outside of work and then hold on to them and make sure that, you regularly do them, that you allow yourself these things that will make you find peace, make you find, energy and allow you to just recharge yourself, really. Yeah, I think that's the most important advice that I could give. Don't let off because it'll always be easy to say, oh, I'm just not going to do that and I'm just going to go to work. But you're going to have to find that balance and you have to make sure you don't let go of that,
Sebastian, inside the kitchen, I imagine it's not just you cooking everything, obviously. Do you have a team that helps you? What's the structure? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. So to give you the whole idea of no chef ever cooks by himself. That would be absolutely impossible. So you have what's called a brigade system in the kitchen, which was very, very closely leaned onto how the army works. So you have, a general, you have your lieutenants, you have your sergeants, and you have your privates, and that's really how it works. And depending on how big or small the place where you work at, maybe a hotel, give a little idea on that. In a hotel, you would have an executive chef, and then you'd have an executive sous chef. Now, that's more or less the right-hand guy for the executive chef. He reports only to the executive chef. Every chef underneath, where you would have a banquet chef de cuisines that run the different hotel restaurants, they all report first and foremost to the executive sous, and then to the executive chefs. Now, each one of those chefs, banquet chef de cuisine, they most likely have, depending on the size of the business that they run, a sous chef themselves. Sous means under, so it's an under chef. So you can kind of see how this kind of keeps fanning out more and more and more. And, some establishments then, if they have, fine dining restaurants, they have chef de partie that run certain areas of the kitchen, and so on and so forth. So obviously the same thing would be with me. I have two sous chefs. One runs banquets, one runs a la carte, and then they, kind of obviously help each other. Kitchen is very much about team. And this brigade system, I always like to say that, kitchen is more or less like a pirate ship. Like back in the day, they used to elect who the captain would be for the voyage, and that captain, kind of had to be held responsible for that time period, but can never forget that he was only in that position because the people on this ship voted for him and supported him. And I think that if you're an executive chef that does not have the support of the kitchen, title is one thing, but if they have no respect for the person that you are and for the way you run things, it's no longer like it used to be, back in the day, the rah-rah chefs that always would scream, yell, and put you down. It doesn't work like that anymore. It can't work like that anymore. Society has changed, and you would not be able to run a kitchen in corporate America, especially like that anymore,
What are your thoughts on Gordon Ramsay?
I think he's an insanely talented chef. I'm also a big fan of his mentor, who was Marco Pierre White, the youngest English Michelin-starred chef, and he's been mentoring Gordon Ramsay, and he's been from a young age on. But Gordon Ramsay is insanely talented. He's you do not get Michelin stars if you are not a talented chef. I think that a lot of the screaming and yelling is honestly for TV, and that's the showpiece of it. I could see him probably, being very firm in his kitchens as well, but the same way as he does it in that kitchen, I think that is very much for TV. And, I think there's, what season is running now? I saw that they were building the new Hell's Kitchen at the Caesar's Palace when I was in Vegas. And, I think that that is probably a high level of entertainment value. But him as a chef, he is incredibly talented. So, it's definitely something that he can, look back on. He has 3 Michelin star restaurants and so on and so forth. Insanely talented, really, really interesting guy. And I've heard actually he's quite an interesting person to talk to as well.
What about Paul Bocuse, the chef that recently passed away? Was he a mentor of yours? Did you get to meet him while he was alive?
Well, unfortunately, I've never met him. Of course, he's a mentor. I mean, he took a cuisine like the French cuisine and was one of the forefathers or one of the godfathers of Nouvelle Cuisine. And Nouvelle Cuisine was a new approach to French cuisine, away from the cream, away from the butters and so on and so forth, or at least use the limitations. And if you can take a cuisine that has such a long-standing and deep passion for its cooking and really can give it such a new spin, I always like to look at it this way. It's, a guy like Thomas Keller can go to any restaurant in the United States and he will be called chef. Paul Bocuse could have gone to any restaurant on the planet and would have been called chef. He was the Godfather. He was just such a shining light in the culinary world. And the Bocuse d'Or, which is the world competition of countries, kind of like the culinary Olympics, where actually recently the United States took gold after taking silver the year before. Very, very huge success for the United States. I know Thomas Keller was one of the people that mentored the chefs that went to that culinary competition. But what a huge success, and that was his making. Paul Bocuse, he came up with this competition, and it is such a renowned competition. That is probably one of the hardest challenges to win because it's such a technically demanding and challenging competition where you have to really be multifaceted, well-rounded, and so strong in so many different areas, from technique to presentation to savory to sweet and just balance and all of that. You're getting judged on so many different factors. It's such a huge competition, and him being the person that put his stamp on that, and just this guiding light he was in culinary. It's very, very interesting. It's not so much that maybe chefs are still copying him, but I feel like, the inspiration people draw from that, is incredible. A guy like Thomas Keller is just such an inspiration to so many chefs in the United States. That doesn't mean everybody's going to cook his food, but people adapt his philosophy, his approach to cooking. If you look in general, I think cooking has moved away from being a mere technique, and it has become something that is about the philosophy of a chef, the making of a chef. And if you look at Netflix with the Chef's Table, those are like culinary hours or hours and a half each episode that just weigh on you emotionally, that show you a philosophy of a chef, that show you what chefs are made of, and how they think, how they feel, what their approach is. Now, it is such an amazing thing to have seen that chefs went from this be quiet, be in the kitchen, that's where you do your thing, to people where everybody wants to find out a little bit more about them. And I think that is the big part of that, that just growing more and more into that. And, Paul Bocuse, he was still one of the old guard, but he was just somebody that was such an inspiration, such a guiding light to people that, when we lost him, I feel like, the culinary world got a little bit darker without him.
Right. And chefs became more like artists, where they express their art using food and combining different ingredients, right?
Yeah, and I'm kind of, the culinary world is such an interesting world because for the longest time, it used to be the Guide Michelin was the guiding force of that, which is the Michelin Guide, which, awards you 1, 2, or 3 Michelin stars. And I'm not saying that it is not valid. Of course it's valid. It is of utmost importance in the culinary world that these things are done and that we have them. But if you look at the counterbalance to that, the San Pellegrino 50 best restaurants in the world, they judge vastly different from each other. And, San Pellegrino it's probably at the forefront of always just kind of figuring out what cuisines are in trend as well. That's maybe something where the Michelin Guide is just, maybe a little bit behind on that. San Pellegrino, if you look 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was, the French Laundry were in those, and the Big Fat Duck in England. And then you got El Bulli, which was for so many years the number one restaurant in the world. And then Noma came from Denmark, El Bulli from Spain, Noma from Denmark. So that's where Nordic cuisine kind of had its run. And, Fäviken in Sweden was one of those restaurants that gradually kept rising in that list. And now you see a lot of Latin American influence in restaurants from Mexico, from Peru, Brazil with Dom. Just it's fascinating to see how they kind of go by showing what these new trends are and allowing a completely different perspective on the culinary world. I mean, Noma was in the San Pellegrino list considered the number one restaurant, I believe, 4 or 5 times. Yet to this day, for instance, they only have 2 Michelin stars. I mean, they're closed currently and revamped. New Noma is coming. But when they were open, they kicked El Bulli off, which was 5 years in a row running as the number one restaurant in the world. You couldn't get a seat there. And then Noma came and kicked them off that number one spot in, I believe, 2011. And then, yet, despite being the best restaurant in the world for so many years, they never made it to get 3 Michelin stars. So that was always something that in the culinary world people were looking at as okay. So I guess you have to kind of find what things you're looking for, and kind of maybe get a mix of those two guides. But sorry to have gone a little bit out but I love talking about cooking, culinary, food, all these things. So I think that it's really has transitioned into people want to find out what's behind the plate. And I'm not just saying ingredients and what's on the plate, but how did it get there? That's twofold, absolutely. One part is, where did it come from? So where was it sourced? Where was it grown? Where was it harvested? And so on. But also, how was it interpreted? I think one of the beauties of the culinary world is that I can give 10 chefs the same ingredient basket and I'll end up with 10 different things afterwards. That is such a fascinating thing, that we chefs look at the same thing and have something completely different going on in our heads. That philosophy of ours, that cooking style, that is something that now is the second part of why people ask what's behind that plate. Who is the person that came up with that? And how did he get to where he is? What is his philosophy, and how was that philosophy built, honed? Those are very, very important things now. And it's fascinating to see. And I think that that's a very important thing to see. And it's slow. We're already in the full force of people wanting that, but it was fun to see that over the last 10, 12 years of my time in this field, where that grew more and more and more. The chef's personality was a important part on the overall plate.
Would you say it takes a specific type of person or special kind of person to be able to appreciate the finer taste and higher end culinary? Because, there is food everywhere. There are fast food restaurants and people buy food from those places just to sustain their body. And there's food that chefs like you create that is totally different.
I don't know if it takes a special kind of person. I think it takes a certain balance. Of course, there is food that is meant to sustain. If you were to eat in a 3 Michelin star restaurant every day, you would lose your sense of wonder for it, I believe. I've always been a firm believer, if you make a damn good pizza, then you are not less of a culinarian than if you cook with prime or Kobe beef, with foie gras or truffles. Of course, skill sets are different, but making a very good dough, making a very good pizza sauce, finding the right way and technique of thinning out the dough, and then getting it to just that perfect crust. There's a lot of technique and skill in that. So I think that doesn't take a special kind of person. I mean, if you are a meat and potato kind of person, and you might not want to try other things, that's fine. That's who you are, But I think we have to cater to what's around us. I've always been a huge fan of locality, and I think that means that not just that you use what's around you, but that you also feed and nourish what's around you. If you're in an area where people do not eat certain foods, why would you want to do that? Sure, you could try it, and maybe it will work because you're giving people an insight into something that they may have not known before. But if it doesn't, then why don't you rather adapt to that area or move to an area where you can do your style of cooking? I'm from Germany. That doesn't mean that wherever I went, German food was the only food that I put on the table. Actually, it was quite the opposite. I loved growing with the regions that I was in. I loved learning, soaking up new influences, new ideas. And I mean, here in Los Angeles, it's just such a vast culinary world. It's just fascinating. I mean, it is like Candyland for chefs. The amount and just vastness of products, meaning produce and dairy and meat, and it's just fascinating. And the ability of pairing all that with local wines, and it is just amazing. I find California is just such an interesting state when it comes to that, but seasonal availability year round of product you can't get anywhere else, just amazing. But I think that, you always need to find balance. Should you eat foie gras every day? No. Should you eat steak every day? No. So I think that you need to keep special restaurants for special moments. And other than that, just good food that nourishes you. There's nothing wrong with that. Home cooking to me is an underappreciated art form. To this day, for me personally, my late mother's home cooking was my favorite cooking in the whole wide world. I would honestly, there's few things I wouldn't do to get another plate of her homemade goulash or her homemade Hungarian cuisine. Just something that evokes emotion, and I think that is such a vital part that chefs cannot forget about. Is you need to invoke emotion. You need to make people feel something when they eat. May that be through a memory of their own or a memory of yours, or may it be a story of how you got to this dish. I think that is such an important part. Tell a story in your menu. When we do the wine dinners at the club, sometimes they are very, very challenging, not from a cooking standpoint, but from a developmental standpoint. You need to find something in that wine, in that vineyard, in that region, a story within your menu that you can just kind of run throughout your entire menu that will connect people emotionally to the dishes that you put in front of them. Because you can put foie gras with lobster and whatnot in front of people. That alone does not make a dish special. I think what makes it special is telling them what your inspiration for the dish was, telling them what you thought of when you were doing that, what products you were using, do they make sense for the region that you serve, did you use local ingredients from around that vineyard that you work with, just something like that. I feel like that is such a vital part, because 6 months down the road, you will not remember the taste, but you will remember the emotion that you have when you ate that bite, when you ate that plate. You will probably not exactly remember the exact flavor profile and everything, but you will always remember that emotion that you had when you ate that. And that is such a terrific thing, and needs to be invoked and needs to be pushed and kind of brought to the edge a little bit. I think that's such an important part. But all around, food first and foremost always has to be nourishing. It's calories, it's vitamins, it's things like that. And I think that baseline you cannot negate. You cannot, get away from that. But I think, for instance, Robuchon mash is the greatest mashed potato you could have. But there's so much butter and so much cream in that, so you probably should not eat that every day. So make it a special occasion for when you try. I think that is, very, very important. I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely. It's very smart of you to actually listen to your customers who come to your restaurant instead of blindly preparing whatever you know best or whatever you want them to have. And in a sense, you are the chief executive officer of the kitchen. You are the CEO of your company called Kitchen, and you delegate to your sous chefs. What are some of the things you learned in the kitchen that allowed you to have a better quality life and have a thriving life outside of the kitchen?
I think one of the things that helped me in the kitchen was my obsessive planning. But I think that adaptation is one of those things that helped me the most, even outside of life. I think when you're a very young chef, you come into the kitchen and it's very ego, very much my way or the highway, very much do everything I tell you? Why don't you do everything I tell you? And I think over time you learn that you need to adapt. You need to see that every single person in your kitchen is driven by different things, motivated by different things, saddened by different things, has different struggles in their life outside of the kitchen. And I think that you need to adapt to those. This whole, one size fits all is, I don't know if that ever really truly applied, but it definitely doesn't anymore. And I think that adapting to the kitchens has helped me in my personal life in a way that I've moved a lot here. I've moved 7 times in this country, due to my career, and I think that, um, you know, picking up this whole adaptation to new environments, that adaptation to new influences around you has helped me in my personal life to always go out with a sense of wonder. I remember when I moved to LA, the first thing I did after obviously unpacking the truck was putting a backpack on and walking around downtown. I wanted to experience, then my new surroundings, and I wanted to adapt to them. I wanted to find out what things are around me that are great, not so great, blah, 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 all these different things. So that's probably one of those biggest skills that I've picked up in the kitchen that helped me in my personal life. So the planning probably has on the outside has helped me in the kitchen, and then the adaptation and the adapting to new environments has helped me outside of the kitchen.
What would you say is the number one thing that you are great at?
The number one thing that I'm good at, cooking would kind of be too much on the nose, but I think planning, organizing. I'm very much a person of structure, a person of organization, and I think that that is the number one thing that I'm trying to implement on the people around me too. I think that this almost obsessive need of planning things that are going on, it is so important because the kitchen is such a environment filled of variables. There's so many things that you cannot predict. Will all your equipment work the next day, or is there things that you're going to have to plan without? Those are things you have to come up with, on the tip of your toes. Maybe your line cook that is so important that day calls off sick because he's just sick and he cannot come into work. I think that it is so important in the kitchen to be good at planning and to be good at organizing so that you're ready for the things that you cannot predict, for the things that you cannot have control over, like an oven breaking, like a fryer not working, like a staff member not coming to the shift because something happened with them or with their family. I think that structure allows to adapt to these things and to make these variables work in your daily life. It wasn't necessarily like that in the beginning, with me personally at least, but that is one of those things that I learned. And as I said before, I come from a hotel background where, you would run a hotel. I was the executive chef, or I was the executive sous chef of a almost 500-room hotel. I was the executive chef of a 500-room hotel, meaning you got multiple outlets, 20, 25, 30 cooks, stewards that report to you. If you do not plan, and I'm talking more than just a schedule, but you plan for contingencies, you plan for things that may happen, variables. So you're in constant communication with your exec sous, with your chef de cuisines and your sous chefs, so that they know you enable them by planning, by organizing and structuring. You enable them to make decisions on their own with the best of knowledge that they could have. If you'd really ask me outside of cooking, what am I really good at? It's planning and structuring things. That is truly what has helped me tremendously, especially on the big scale venues that I've worked at.
How would you say life imitates cooking or the kitchen, or vice versa? How does the kitchen imitate life?
If life imitates cooking, and I got to tell you, I think that it is more cooking adapting to life. I think the trends that are going on definitely shape the cuisines that are going on. Now, don't get me wrong, you will always have, a Mexican restaurant, an Italian restaurant, so on and so forth. But I believe that the forefront of culinary and the changes in society kind of flip-flop in how they push each other and what they want, what they're looking for. I remember when sous vide would come out. Sous vide has been around for the longest time. Sous vide meaning that you cook things in a temperature-controlled environment, like a water bath. So you would vacuum seal, for instance, a tenderloin, and you would put it in a water bath that has an immersion heater that lets the water continuously run at exact temperature. So if you set that on 134, 135, which is mid-rare, that steak, you can put it in there for 3 hours. It will never go past that temperature. It cannot overcook. So if you now pull that out and sear it really quick on a hot environment, you have a perfect medium rare steak. That technique, though, even though it was so hot for the 10 years now, was around in the 70s already. I think that the whole molecular gastronomy thing was at one point the big hype. I mean, you could see that, El Bulli was probably, with the big fat duck together, they were just the big front runners on that. And that's when they were, considered the temples of gastronomy that you had to go to. But I think that one cannot live with the other. So societal change and expectation is kind of shaping culinary. And then by culinary adapting and, putting their toe right on the line and then just shoving it 1 inch further, you kind of constantly keep pushing each other back and forth. One without the other can't really exist. So, you want to do something that is not wanted at the time, then you're going to have a hard time selling that to people. You kind of have to go a little bit with the wishes of your customers in regards to, you have to know what field you're playing on. And then on that field, you can go crazy, And I think that it's also our chef's job to kind of push people out of their comfort zone. If that's the restaurant you're going to, some restaurants, that's their job. They push the boundaries a little bit. They deconstruct, they chill what maybe usually is hot, something that's solid is now liquid, and so on and so forth. Some interpretations are better than others, but I think that is important because you kind of have to keep evolving around with that. Now recently the push is past the Nordic cuisine that we talked about earlier, go very much into Latin American cuisine, and it's fascinating to see the things, that are done down there by the Peruvian ceviche now is just so hot. There's just so much hype around it, and restaurants in Peru are very, very big on those on the San Pellegrino 50 best list. And now they're getting more and more recognition, on the Michelin Guide, where we have Michelin Guides Asia and Michelin Guides South America, and so on and so forth. So, beginning it was more European than America, and now they're coming to the Asias and the South America. So you can kind of see some things take a little longer to follow along, especially things that have been very static within themselves, like the Michelin Guide. But, society is something that follows very quickly with that, and they want to see these influences on your menu. Private club that we are in, we obviously have to find something that appeals to everybody. I like to say that we are a locally influenced restaurant, and in LA, that says a lot, because it's just such a melting pot of societies, cultures, and food ideas and philosophies. And then you add on that all the amazing produce and all the things you got around us. I mean, it's just a never-ending, constant evolution within itself. And you can see that in downtown with all the restaurants that are popping up. But what I love about it is that a lot of them are staying true to themselves. Broken Spanish, terrific restaurant, such terrific Mexican cuisine, but such a modern spin on that cuisine, that unfortunately for so long kind of had this kind of street food vibe within it. And now you have a restaurant that does it on such an upscale level. It's just fantastic. I've been there numerous times. Just a great restaurant, But going back to the origin of the question is I think that both have influence on each other, society and life on cooking and vice versa, because we kind of always push each other a little more. One tells the other when the hype is done, and then it's our job to kind of go back out and kind of see what's going on and what's fresh, So those are things that will constantly happen, I believe. And history repeating, where you kind of use things that have been around but have been somewhat forgotten, and now you bring them back. That's something that is very big as well.
Very similar to the movie industry. I would say movies affect life, and then life creates some of the characters and plots in the movies that we watch, and it's a never-ending cycle going back and forth, affecting each other.
I mean, of course, if you look at movies from the 90s where, romantic comedies were just constant, I mean, then you had the British invasion, both in music and in movies, where an actor like Hugh Grant was in so many movies, So I think that you have that in many facets of life where trends come and go. You always have some that are mainstays. But if you're on the forefront of change, then I think that's the constant, one nudging the other and nudging the other a little bit forward,
Sebastian, what are your core values that are non-negotiable?
That are non-negotiable is that if I wouldn't eat it, don't serve it. Or if I didn't, if I'm not going to eat it, then I'm not going to serve it. So that's one of the big things. That is honestly something that I tell a lot of cooks too in the beginning. It's a very helpful mantra. If you put something on a plate that you wouldn't eat yourself, now I'm not talking because you don't like Brussels sprouts or you don't eat pork. I'm talking it is not appealing. Then why would you even put it on a plate? So that means that you have to set yourself standards that's the bare minimum. And my standards probably will be higher than that. So to me, that is the first non-negotiable thing. The other thing is cutting corners. It's, to me, serving things that are subpar, that are not fresh, that are not good. I think that you have a responsibility. People come to you and they trust you. They don't just trust you that they don't, that's the basic thing. That's why we have the health department, that what you're going to feed them doesn't make them sick, but that it nourishes them. That's, now we're talking even further back on the spectrum, not just not sick, but also nourishes them. And then on top of that, that's the basic foundation. And then on top of that, you can build your house of philosophy, inspiration, and food interpretation that you have. So I think you have to have these core ethics of serving what you're telling them you serve, using good product, and doing the very best you can to make sure that it is prepared as good as possible. Those are things you just need to have, and I feel like that's something that is a solid structure to build on, and it allows for I'm a huge fan of recipes, but then somehow I'm not, because I feel that you need, if you prepare the same dish over and over, of course you need to have a recipe. But I feel that you need to sometimes allow people to find their own path a little bit, culinarians to allow that. You have, as a chef, you have the obligation of being a teacher too, because people follow you and they come to work with you, and that's your job to teach these people, And I believe that that's, a big part of that, of allowing culinary freedom in that. But going back to the original part was honestly have ethics. You need to have ethics in the kitchen. I can promise you, because you've seen always on, Dateline and so on and so forth, you send your plate 20 times back in my restaurant, nothing bad will happen to that plate. I know that you sometimes see those horror videos from diners or something like that. Would never happen, because our job is to serve you the food that you asked for, and we're going to make sure we get it right. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And those core values that you shared are applicable across the board. In business, for example, if the owner of the company invents a cream and they wouldn't use it themselves, then they shouldn't sell it. Well, in a perfect world, of course. What is the best way to eat a steak, according to Chef Sebastian Heil?
Firstly, you have to look at what kind of cut you're getting. I will be honest with you. I always said that probably the biggest luxury of my job is that the least appealing things to me that I would never order in a restaurant are filet, shrimp, and lobster. So that doesn't mean that filet is not a great cut. It is just not appealing to me. It is not what I would eat. To me personally, I eat my steaks medium rare. I feel like that is the best balance of cooking versus texture versus flavor. I believe that, if you go past that, just not as yummy to me. Yummy is really the expression that I have to use on that because things have to appeal to you. So if you'd ask me how you should order your steak, I believe medium rare is the way to go. That can work for pretty much all cuts. You have to discern, though, between grass-fed and corn-fed. There's a textural difference between the two. Grass-fed meats by nature, especially if they have been grass-fed their entire life, like one of the steaks we're serving in the club right now is a grass-fed Australian beef that has been raised on pastures their entire life. Sometimes what you'll see when it says grass-fed is that they've been corn-fed and then get finished out before the butchering on grass. Those are grass-fed their entire life. They will always have a grainier texture than corn-fed. Corn-fed beef has a smooth texture. That is the big difference between the two. Now, does that mean you cannot eat grass-fed medium rare? Absolutely not. But you're going to have to get yourself prepared for a different sensory experience than you would have with a corn-fed meat. Both can be eaten mid-rare. Both are, very, very good. A corn-fed American prime beef, that's a wonderful steak to have on there. Now, if you'd ask me what the best steak to get is, I'm a ribeye guy all the way around. That's, for me, the most flavorful cut you can have. But there's just terrific other cuts. New York strip is very good. Filet is very good. Flat iron's very tasty. Generally, you will get more marbling in a meat if it's a working muscle. A tenderloin, which runs in the back, is naturally tender. Won't have a whole lot of marbling, but it's still tender because it's not a muscle that works a lot in the animal body. Other cuts, like strips and ribeyes, come from areas that work a whole lot more. So there's more fat stored in those too. So there's obviously more marbling in those cuts as well. Marbling means flavor. Working muscle means more flavor. Like chicken breast is less flavorful than chicken thigh. Chicken breast doesn't work a whole lot, white meat. Chicken thigh works a lot, dark meat. So it's a working muscle, and working muscles tend to be more flavorful. But generally, I don't think that there's necessarily rules. For me, it would be a shame to cook a steak meat well done. But if that's how you like it, then, who am I to tell you what you like and what you don't like? I think that chefs need to get away from that whole ego thing. The first and foremost job from you is to make sure that you serve the foods the way the patrons like them. So if I serve steak and you like yours well done, who am I to tell you that you're not okay with that? Would I personally eat it that way? Absolutely not. But that does not mean that there's technically right or wrong. Now, a well-done steak will have less moisture in it. It will be drier. A lot of the flavor will be gone from it. That is just how it will happen. That is just science that happens when you cook it that much. But that still doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I think it's a matter of preference.
Thank you for sharing that, Sebastian. My last question is, what is your personal definition of a thriving life?
Oh, wow. I don't know if I'm a person that can judge on that. Well, in my professional life, my thriving professional life, I feel like I am somebody that can definitely speak to that. I think that it is something that I feel like I've never lost is my sense of wonder and this constant yearning to learn more. That there's, more than one way to go about something, that there's more than one way to prepare something, see something, cook something. That is, I feel if you keep your sense of wonder and remain a student of the game, doesn't matter what you're in, what field you are in, I think that you start deteriorating the moment you say, okay, I'm done, I'm set, this is all I'm going to do. There's so much out there, and I'm just speaking for my field right now, that I've never done or seen or tasted or prepared myself. I would be a fool if I said that I'm done, this is it. So a thriving life, I think, for me professionally, came from constantly looking for more and constantly evolving and constantly learning more, seeing more, reading more. And you know what? Now, with all these things you can see on TV, watching more. You have to keep this curiosity in your profession in order to find new values, because I don't know who said that, but the first thing you need to do when you reach a goal is to set another goal and set another goal and set another goal. And I think that you need to constantly keep doing that, is to always strive for more and always push for more and don't settle. I think that was my definition of my thriving life, and professionally at least. I do not know if I'm the right person to give personal advice for people's private lives, but I feel that professionally, as a chef, that has been the thing that has allowed me to thrive in my career. And you know, City Club Los Angeles is a terrific destination. It's the number one club in Club Corp, and Club Corp has many. You know that, you know, we have business clubs, country clubs. So, you know, being the head chef there, that's top of the game. And I feel like that's a reward. And that shows thriving life. And I think it was earned of always wanting more and always pushing for more, you know?
Oh, wow. That's an amazing answer. Where can our listener find you? Where can they contact you?
You can find me. I do not have a personal website yet, but I have an Instagram account that's Chef Sebastian Takes LA that I created when I came to LA because I felt that, I was missing that social media aspect of my life. So if you're looking for me there, that would be one way. Another way would be in the City Club Los Angeles.
Sebastian, thank you very much for spending some time with us today at the Thriving Life Club.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very, very interesting. I always love to talk about food and my career and being a chef. And, I could do this for hours to talk about food philosophy and things like that. I think that it's such a fascinating field. And it's so amazing for me to see that it has gained such importance in on a broader spectrum now than it used to. It's really fascinating. Thank you for having me on. It was an honor and it's been a pleasure.
And there we have it. Another amazing guest has visited our club. Make sure to subscribe to the Thriving Life Club podcast on your favorite app. Simply go to thriving.lifeclub.com/ and the name of your favorite platform. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube. You get the point. You will find the show notes, the episode freebie, and the resources mentioned during the episode by navigating your browser to thriving.lifeclub.com/ and the number of this episode. For example, for the episode 3, you would go to thriving.lifeclub.com/ 3. For the episode 7, you would go to thriving.lifeclub.com/ 7. We want to make this podcast the number 1 podcast on iTunes in its category. When you feel inspired, head over to iTunes and give us a quick review to keep the podcast commercial free and get it discovered by more people like you and families like yours. Rate and review the podcast on iTunes and share it with your friends. Let's inspire more people together. And until the next episode, just remember, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, live a thriving life.